Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you do join us on there, you get a weekly bonus episode of just everything else I'm watching. People ask me all the time, what other movies are you watching? What shows are you watching? There's a weekly bonus episode on the Patreon. So, and also some interviews. You know, we covered The Mandalorian, WandaVision, a lot of the Marvel shows, and I have guests on there and we talk about those shows. So if that interests you, check it out. I do want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Woodman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Well, I've got a new guest on the podcast. I've got Chris Daria. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, well, welcome to the show, Chris. I think you mentioned before we started recording that you found us over on Academy Rewind.
I
A
did.
great podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me on. I'm Chris Daria. I am in professional life. I work here in great state of Texas in higher education for a university as an academic advisor and a director of academic advising. In my side hustle life, I am an actor and a dialect coach. So I've
Oh, awesome.
done community theater pretty much all over the area that I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And just starting out just before pandemic. So we kind of started and stopped, but I was able to kind of start doing some dialect coaching on various plays and shows that I've been in. My wife is a theater teacher, so she brings me in to teach her students accents ranging from Cuban to Irish to Scottish to Brooklyn. I'm originally from New York, so that one is heavy in my mind. And then I also did West Side Story as a dialect coach, and I've acted throughout. I've actually been able to keep it up in the pandemic, acting and directing a few things virtually, but then also doing a big stage show just this past summer. So yeah, I'm a big theater guy, big movie guy. That's been a big thing this pandemic, just watching as much as I can get my hands on, trying not to go insane. So all of
Yeah,
that is there.
I think
So
we're all
yeah.
there.
hmm So
I, I
that
want
is just a little bit about me. Yeah.
I wanted to say, okay, so I want to focus on the dialect thing just for a quick second, then we'll
Go
jump
for
into
it.
the episode. But when I was like, I think in middle school, my mother was like, "You don't have any hobbies. Like you're boring. Like you need more hobbies." And so she put me in the Dallas Children's Theater, and I took classes there. And one of the things
Nice.
that interests me the most was dialects. And I had these tapes. I don't know if y'all still, I mean, I'm sure they're not cassette tapes anymore, but I had these cassette tapes that would teach you like a German accent and a
Sure.
British accent and stuff like that. And I would listen to them and try to, I was really bad to be transparent, but I think that's really cool. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Well, thank you. I've always had the ear for voices, and I've always wanted to try to find something else kind of side along to acting that's in the theater
Yeah.
world. And it's just been that's just kind of fallen into my lap. It's really a luck of the fact that my wife, who is a brilliant director and great with developing relationships and staging and all of that, really doesn't have an ear for voices at all. So when we started dating, she's like, "There's a character in my show who's Irish, and I can't do it. Can you come in and work with her?" And I was like, "Yeah," and we got her to do an Irish accent,
Oh, that's
the
so cool.
students. So and then
Accents
so
are so cool.
every year they do an accent. She does a show that has an accent. I'm there to help that process out. I've done Boston accents. The New York one is obviously something near and dear to my heart as a native New Yorker. I don't want to hear a bunch of Texans trying to do it and do it poorly. So that's where it
For
comes
real.
in with some stuff like that. So yeah, that's it's been a really cool gig, and I've gotten to take it and put it into my acting. Um, as much as I can, and just use as much of the tricks on myself as I use on the people that I work with.
When I was younger, maybe I think the Texas stuff kind of has trickled in as I've gotten older, but especially when I was younger, people would say, "Well, you don't sound like a Texan." Or even when I would go, on for work and I would go to another place and they say, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Dallas." They say, "Well, you don't sound like it." And I said, "Well, that's because I'm an only child that was raised on TV."
There you
So,
go.
I'm listening to what do they call it? The standard Midwestern accent my entire life. And so
Sure.
I talk like that. I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating. So I want to touch on that.
Absolutely.
But back to
Yeah,
what we're focused on here. So,
absolutely.
on this podcast, my guest always picks a movie and we talk about a movie that they love. So what movie did you choose to talk about today?
I chose the 2014 Jon Favreau joint Chef.
Yes. I'm so glad you picked this one. I really like this movie. In fact, I didn't even have to watch it again because I've seen it more than once. So,
Same here.
um,
Same here. And it's off
I
Netflix, which makes me really sad because they keep taking
I
it on and taking it off.
know.
But
I've noticed that. Like, I went to go look for it, and I was like, I don't know. I think just because he's so heavily involved with Disney now, I
mm,
almost expected it to be on Disney Plus, but it wasn't. So you'll have to
ah,
rent it if you haven't. But let's talk a little bit about your history with this movie. Like, when did you first see it?
sure. I think I first saw it in 2014, right when it kind of came out. It wasn't. I don't think it really was in the theaters that much. I don't really remember it being in the theaters, but I saw it. Actually I can step back a little bit. Before I even saw the movie, I big into podcasting. Obviously, I'm doing a podcast, so the podcast, it's now the ID10T podcast. The Nerdist Chris Hardwick had Jon Favreau on to talk about
Wow.
everything and talked about that movie. And I was like, that sounds really interesting as a concept and as an idea, because he told the story of how he was burnt out from working with Marvel and Disney on these
Mhm.
giant productions and wanted to do something that was a little bit more his speed, back to some of the stuff that he kind of did before he got so huge. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. I like that idea a lot. Then I found the movie, and I'm also a very big fan. This was kind of, I went through a phase of food movies. Big
Nice.
fan of movies involving food. Uh, I could, if you need me, we can do a whole series on movies involving food.
Can you tell me
Uh,
a couple of them real quick? Like, what are some other famous food movies that you're
some other
into?
fame, okay, some other famous food movies. I mean, you can't really get too far without saying Ratatouille, and I don't mean
Sure,
that as a
sure.
joke. Ratatouille is a fantastic movie. There's a movie called The 100 Foot Journey, starring Helen Mirren,
Okay.
about warring restaurants 100 feet away from each other. The one that kind of got me in the mood for food movies is Big Night. It's
Okay.
from the
I haven't
90s.
seen these.
Okay, Big Night, that's required viewing. It's
Okay.
Stanley Tucci and Tony
Oh,
Shalhoub
I love him.
play Italian brothers who come to America to start a traditional Italian restaurant, but get undermined by what I'm going to call the Olive Gardenification of Italian food.
Yeah.
Even though this was set in like the 50s, it was happening back then, and they
Ah,
have a big night because their friend and competitor promises that famous singer Louis Prima is going to come to their restaurant. So that's the
I
big night.
see.
And
Okay, I'll
it's
have to check that
just
out.
it's so good. If you are a fan of Stanley Tucci, Shalhoub, this is my favorite Tucci movie of all time, bar
Okay.
none.
Oh,
It's
wow,
so
that's
good.
that's high praise. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
see that.
But all of that kind of came to a head of like, yeah, I'm watching these movies, and then Chef shows up. This is kind of right in my wheelhouse. I've been a big Food Network guy from Jump. Um, when I had cable TV, the number one channels on my television were Comedy Central and Food Network. I just
Mm,
sit there watching Iron Chef and Chopped and all those shows as
yeah,
often as possible, just leaving the TV on through all of that. So I love
cool.
food. I love to cook myself. And then I saw the movie, and it became like comfort food.
Yeah,
Ironically enough, is this is just the kind of movie that you can go back to at any moment and any time and just watch it. It's a quick watch, and it's so comforting in there. I've said for the longest time that Forrest Gump is my favorite movie, and these days I'm thinking about it, I'm like, no, I think it's Chef. I think Chef is my
oh,
favorite
wow.
movie of all time.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I saw it. I can't remember. I mean, it's possible that I saw it in a theater only because I saw it with my mother, and she tends to prefer, sort of independent films or kind of slice of life type movies.
Mm,
Um, and I know I saw it with her because I remember that I saw it with her. Um, we had a discussion that we'll talk about the movie. There's probably only one issue I have with this whole movie, and I've
okay.
heard it from a couple people that have seen it, and I'm like, I agree, but it's minor. Um, but I came home and I said, Nick, I just saw this movie, Chef, and we should watch it. And I think at the time I was traveling a lot for work,
Hmm.
and I had been to Miami a few times. I think that kind of influenced it a little bit,
Yeah.
and sort of being very new to Cuban food. Would still say I'm new to it. But
Sure.
there was just a vibe going on that I was really interested in food at that time as well. Well, I still am, but
Yeah.
so that's kind of the headspace that I was in. So before we go further, I do want to say that I don't do like a spoiler free and then spoiler filled part of the show. We're just going to chat about it. So I
Sure.
would think it's probably best if you're listening to pause here and go watch it and come back. And if
Hmm.
you're still here, here's the summary of Chef. After a controlling owner pushes him too far, Chef Carl Casper quits his position at a prestigious Los Angeles restaurant. As he tries to figure out what his next step should be, he finds himself in Miami. Carl joins forces with his ex wife, best friend, and son to launch a food truck business, and the venture provides a chance to reignite his passion for cooking, as well as his zest for life and love.
That's
So,
it right there.
yeah. I
And
think one thing. Oh, go ahead.
isn't there just something romantic about a food truck? Like,
Oh, yeah,
seriously.
absolutely. I think,
I
yeah. Go
I
ahead.
totally, I'm sorry I keep cutting off,
No,
but
no,
I
you're fine.
definitely went through and still am partially in the food truck phase. Anywhere I've lived um, North Carolina, here in Texas, I seek them out. I find the food truck parks. I had friends that own food trucks. I'm like, there's something
Oh,
just so
cool.
romantic. And if I ever had the same gumption that Carl does in this movie, that Chef Carl does, I would 100% invest things into a food truck and drive around and cook for people. There's just something so I romantic. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the word I'm going for. It's just if there's something so whimsical about it to me.
Well, and I think when this movie came out too, food trucks, at least here in Texas, were becoming really, really big. It's
Hmm.
something that we didn't have for a long time over
Oh
here.
yeah.
It's hard to even imagine a time before food trucks, but I
Yep.
remember I have a distinct memory of my mom telling me, "Oh, me and her and her husband had gone to New York, and she was like,
Hmm.
you won't believe it, they have all this food on the street." She's like describing street food.
Oh
She's
yeah.
like, "It's so good though, but it comes out of a truck, but it's really good." And like, I listen to her and I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of like when I've been in Europe. Like they have a lot of stuff like that, but we
Oh
didn't really have it
yeah.
in the South and in Texas specifically."
Hmm.
Until fairly recently. So this
Yeah.
movie kind of came out around the time where like food trucks are kind of exploding all over the
I would
place.
say
And
so.
yeah, and I agree with you. It is I don't know. I think maybe romantic is the right word because I think this movie kind of focuses on a couple things that, food is pleasure. There is something sensual about it, and romantic and relationship building. And also it's part like, food truck and also part road trip movie at some points
Yeah.
in this film.
Oh yeah.
And that's a very romantic thought as well. So I think, I don't know. I think you're absolutely right in pointing that out.
Sure, absolutely. I think I going back to like the food truck comment. I, as a native New Yorker, I'm from Long Island. I grew up going into the city, getting a hot dog off of a cart, getting a gyro off of a truck. So that's just ingrained in us, and we don't think it's all that special until you leave it. You're like, wow, I just miss being able to walk outside and have a dude shove a knish in my face and stuff like
Yes.
that. And I came to Texas in 2013, and now and right when I was coming in, like going into some of the like the parks really exploded within the first 2 or 3 years. Like Clyde Warren Park, there's food trucks
Yeah.
lining that thing. There's some parks down in the Fort Worth side of life too that I would go to. Yeah, it's really cool, and just to see how people are kind of getting really gourmet about just selling food out of a truck, which the New Yorkers have basically like this is basic level, and then everyone has kind of upped the ante, and I think it's awesome.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good thing. It definitely helped with the palette in the city. It helps bring in, tourists. It helps.
Oh yeah.
It's just been great.
Hmm.
I have a couple of quick facts I wanted to share
Go for it.
in kind of studying about this movie. So Jon Favreau did his own cooking by training with food truck chef Roy Choi. Choi sent
Hmm.
Favreau to a week of intensive culinary French school where Favreau sharpened his knife skills, learned how to make sauces. He says, I brought him to the kitchen and he just kind of fit in. I threw him a couple of tests, like a case of chives or a case of onions or peeled 2 cases of avocados just to see where his mind and his situation and abilities were and how interested he was in these things. He just attacked them. He really became a part of it. And eventually, 5 years after this film release, Choi teamed up again for The Chef Show, which is a cooking documentary on Netflix. Now, I just watched the first episode of this
Mm.
right before we started recording, and they were in that episode. They were talking to the chef from Milk Bar, which is
Yep.
like I think LA based, and I'm
Hmm.
so excited about that because I just got like within the past month I got their sampler. Somebody bought me their sampler,
Oh,
and
there
it
you
was
go.
so dang good. I was like converted because I'm not like a big sweets person, if I'm honest. Like desserts are not really usually my thing,
Sure.
but wow, it just like was so good. And then just to get to see kind of the behind the scenes, and it's
Hmm.
kind of fun watching Favreau be like the student, because he's just
Oh
so
yeah.
good at what he does, but he's got this like intensity and energy for learning that I think is really infectious. Have you watched the documentary?
I have. I've seen every season of the
Oh,
show.
awesome, awesome, awesome. Oh
As
yeah, I
soon
guess it's been on for a while now then.
It's been on, I think, since 2000, what, 19 or so,
Hmm.
and basically it was the period of time where Chef was off Netflix. The movie was off Netflix, so the only way
Oh
I could
gosh.
digest information about the show or about the movie was to watch this show. And I was like, okay, this is a really good like supplement. This is a good if uh, the movie is the steak. This is great potatoes on the side. Just something that I can enjoy alongside of it. And I love it. There are episodes. I don't want to spoil too much, but there are episodes involving some people and restaurants they do from the movie. They go
Oh,
down.
awesome.
They go have like a full on visit to Franklin's, which is featured in the movie,
Oh, that's right. That's
the
right.
barbecue joint in Austin, Texas.
Yes.
And like they go to Skywalker Ranch because Favreau is connected to Star Wars now. So they go all these different places, and they're talking to chefs, they're talking to just normal folk, and it's really cool how they are able to pull it together. It's a really fun take on kind of the food infotainment show.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point earlier that you were talking about, I also read that this is his first non-Iron Man collaboration between writer and director Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr.,
Yeah, there you go.
which is very
That is
interesting.
that he's only in the movie for like, let's say, 15 minutes, if
I
that.
know.
It's an amazing scene. The one thing, and I know you've got the fun facts, but just to like
Oh, go
take
for
each
it.
one
No, go
and
ahead.
morsel them out a little bit. The strength of the writing on this movie is that there are the casting as well, is that there are
Yes.
these heavy hitters that aren't in the movie for a lot of the movie. You would expect people like Robert Downey Jr., Dustin Hoffman, Scarlett Johansson to kind of
Mm-hmm.
be featured throughout the movie. But no, the movie is really just about Carl Casper, Jon Favreau, reigniting his passion and reclaiming his passion for what he does and the people that kind of influence that along the way. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's okay for them to kind of come in and out, but then you get the amazing casting of these folks that totally steal the scene, but then move forward. One of my favorite scenes in the movie, comedian Russell Peters plays a bike cop who basically exploits Jon Favreau for his unwanted internet fame.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best scenes in the movie. Like I said, Robert Downey Jr. playing basically, I think I've read it said like the worst version of Tony Stark is what Robert Downey Jr. plays in this, and it's amazing. It's so fun, and you get these excellent cameos. Amy Sedaris shows up for like 5 minutes, and she's
Oh
just a
yeah.
joy.
Yeah.
She plays a typical Hollywood PR agent
I
trying
wonder if that's
to.
why she's in Star Wars now.
I have a feeling that connection was made there, and it's a really cool idea.
It
So
is.
all of it's there, and yeah, it's just the strength of the casting and the writing to say like, hey, we're going to throw in these really awesome heavy hitters. They're going to show up for a minute, do their thing, and then we're going to get back to the story, and it all feeds
Right.
the story too.
100%. Well,
Hmm.
many critics have viewed this film as an allegory of Jon Favreau's career as a
Oh yeah.
director by going back to his independent film roots, allowing him freedom to make his own decisions after time working under the close and demanding eye of Marvel Studios, and after one comic book film adaptation, Cowboys and Aliens, which was a slight box office failure. However,
Hmm.
Favreau has denied this comparison. So, what do you think about that?
Uh, I given that he kind of talked about it in interviews prior um, to uh, to the release of the movie, I don't I don't know if I believe him that it's not true.
I
He's kind of
agree. I
saying
think it
two.
may
He's
be
kind of saying
subconscious.
yeah. He's kind of saying two different things, and and I mean it's so closely mirrored together. And in interviews, I think he was very careful not to drop Marvel's name or anything like that. Just talking about
That's true. He's under
big
some pressure
budgets and
there.
things like that. Like if you think about it, and I'm not the biggest like uh, connoisseur of all John Favreau's complete oeuvre of everything he's done, but but like you look at the 90s and things like Swingers, and then Elf kind of broke him wide open, and then he got into the
Hmm.
Iron Man stuff, and then you said Cowboys and Aliens, which I kind of forgot was him,
Yeah, I
thankfully.
forgot too.
But then yeah, to just anybody who's been doing something for so long needs a refresh. And that's what I think Chef was for him. And that's what the plot of the movie is for the character. And yeah, he's right back in it because he's back working with Disney. He's done all of the photorealism movies, Jungle Book, Lion King. He's directing Mandalorian. He's writing Book of Boba Fett. He's all up in it. Um, and he's still appearing as a character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in all those movies. So it's not like he's just made a complete left turn. He just kind of stepped back so he can step forward.
I
And
agree.
mhm,
Yeah, but I was gonna say that I agree with what you're saying, and also I almost feel like post Chef, and this isn't to criticize Jungle Book or Iron Man, but when you think about projects like The Mandalorian and Boba Fett, of course they have more time than say Iron Man does, but
mhm,
it feels like maybe things started shifting a little bit more character driven. Do you agree? Like it almost feels like, when you think about The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, the relationships in those movies, in those projects, are more center stage
mhm.
than, let's say like in Jungle Book or in Iron Man.
I think that's just a feature of John Favreau to begin with. That
Hmm.
if he had his way, I imagine every all of his work would be character driven rather than plot driven. And
Right.
because you've got what was at the time some a entity called the Marvel Creative Committee that was kind of
Mm.
steering the ship on a lot of this, and people said it was. I've heard interviews and read articles that it was just not a fun time to work with that committee, and they've since dissolved it, which is why like I guess Phase 3 and 4 have been so widely received um, in as letting directors kind of do what they want for everything like
Gotcha.
that.
Yeah.
So
Makes
I
sense.
feel like it's there. Like Iron Man is definitely a character piece. The first Iron Man movie is definitely a character piece. Elf, I think, is a character piece.
Right.
Uh, and so I feel like it's just a feature of his work, but it just depends on the project that you can do.
Hmm.
Like Iron Man 2 tries to be a character piece, and I don't think it's a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. But it does seem like it's gearing towards something else, gearing towards
Yeah.
what we learn as Avengers. And then things like Jungle Book and Lion King, we already know what those movies are, but we're doing them again because we got the new technology to do them. I'm not going. They were fun. I enjoyed watching those movies, but again, when you let John Favreau just kind of get in there, take a character, and put him in a situation and see how it goes, that's where his wheelhouse is, I think.
I agree, and I think the criticism that those two particular movies got, Jungle Book and Lion King, is that they were technically amazing, but they
Hmm.
kind of lacked heart.
Yeah,
That
agreed.
and his other work doesn't lack that. So I think you're right, where he was feeling a little bit creatively stifled, and I mean, there's no better representation of that than in the movie with with the critic, right? I mean, we'll
Hmm.
probably get into that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I can see how it'd be dicey for him to openly admit, yeah, this is a jab. This is a jab, Marvel Studios, and it's a frustration of an artist. I mean, food
Sure.
is art as well, and what
Oh
he
yeah.
does is art. So I mean, I could, yeah, it's undeniable, but maybe he has to deny it. I hadn't thought about that. So we've talked a little bit about, some of the casting. We've talked about some quick facts, but I think we should dive into the movie
Let's
and
do it.
pick some of your favorite scenes. So why don't you take it
Okay,
away?
sure, sure. This the some of my favorite scenes. There are two that kind of openly stand out, and the first two that do have to do with actual making of food.
Okay.
And they're kind of right at the top, just as everything kind of goes. It's this. The first one is the scene when we kind of discover that he's been seeing Scarlett Johansson's character. I would say on the side, but he's divorced, so I guess there is no side. But kind of
I think
striking,
the only dicey thing is she works for him, and
yeah,
she's like
that,
the hostess and
yeah,
so much younger. But
hmm
you're kind of like, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you're kind of like, this kind of checks out. Anyway, go
sure.
ahead.
But it's when he makes the pasta.
Oh
Right off
yeah,
the
great
bat,
scene, great scene.
and that scene, it's a quick little moment. It's just you get to watch a guy really enjoy what he's doing. It's kind of the first hint of like, okay, this is a good thing, because he it's right after I think the review comes out where he is, or it's like right after he cooked for the critic, where he's just been feeling stressed from working with Riva, of working with Dustin Hoffman's character.
Hmm.
And he takes, I think Scarlett Johansson's character's name is Molly. He
Hmm.
goes back to his place with her, and she's just watching him work, and he's loving it, and she's got the eyes for him because, well, it's kind of sexy watch somebody do what they love to do, and then when the end product is something you can eat, it's even better. And I don't know if have you just to kind of go on, have you tried to make any of the food from the show?
I should. Okay,
Mm,
full confession. The part of me that really relates to this movie is I worked in restaurants early
sure.
on when I was young. I was a waitress, a really bad one actually, for years, because it made more money at the time than say
Mm,
retail work. And then I transitioned into like being a barista, which I liked a lot more. But I would say that I was a terrible cook, and I actually have to credit the pandemic in making me
sure.
a better one, because I
Mhm.
in during the pandemic I had nothing but time, no more excuses. I'd lost my job
Yep.
at the time, and I had all the time in the world to cook, and I have gotten better at cooking.
Awesome.
But I am no chef, and so I love this scene because for a different reason. I think I love it because this introduces us to the idea of what is so attractive about Carl.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I
Oh, good
think
point.
on the surface you're like, okay, here's this big dude. Molly is this incredibly, beautiful young woman. Why
Hmm.
is she so attracted to this guy? Well, this scene says why.
Yep.
He is a master chef. He's a celebrity, and he's really good at what he does. And he's got this passion that he puts into his cooking that is attractive. And I think
Oh,
you
yeah.
hit on something when you talked about cooking a meal for someone. I mean, it's such an intimate act,
Oh,
and I
it's my
think,
favorite thing. It's my
yeah, and
favorite
I
thing to
think,
do.
her doing that or him doing that for her, it's like, I mean, it's like a famous actor giving a monologue in front of you. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
really it's really special, and
Hmm.
I think he's attracted to Molly too because in her eyes he's still a hero. Um, it plays
Absolutely.
into his ego a lot,
Hmm.
and I think that's explored in the movie is like being able to put aside the celebrity and ego and get back to like his actual passion. But still, I love this movie because they make that food look so dang good. And
Right.
it's such a simple dish. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be this big complicated fancy dish to be really really good, and so that's why
Absolutely.
I like that
And
scene. But have to
I
agree, it stood out to me. I was thinking of when I said sensual, I
sure.
was thinking of this scene. Yeah.
Yep. And I've got a fun fact for you about that. All of the food on set is actual food that was
Really?
prepared.
So no
Uh,
like sprayed with
they
things,
never did any
chemicals, no
set dress.
paint.
Yeah, then no set dressing, no food. Every piece of food that was work created on the show was meant to be consumed and could be consumed. It was actual food that they used. And when you've got Roy Choi back there, I think he was promoted to co-producer after taking Jon Favreau under his wing. Is like, yeah, we're not going to do any of this bull crap that involves not that involves just set dressing food. So everything could have been eaten, and I think they did. So
Yeah.
when you're doing it with that, and yeah, I only bring up cooking the food because this is the one dish from the movie that I've actually tried.
Oh,
And you're right,
nice.
it's so simple to make, and it really does nothing. But it's one of the purest definitions of simple yet brilliant that I can come up with, because it's really it's just pasta, olive oil, garlic, parsley, a little bit of stuff in there. But it's amazing, and that scene definitely goes to you when it comes to that. Another favorite scene that I can come up with kind of happens right after, it is the take two of the critic. So
Mm,
after he gets the bad review, we can call it, and calls out Ramsey Michelle on Twitter, which is just a fun thing. As someone who's fairly social media illiterate, I don't even have a Twitter. It's always fun to see people use it poorly
it's
in
just
that
so
way.
tempting. It's
Oh
right
yeah,
there, you
it's
know?
right there. It's right there. That's why I don't have one, because I know I'd be tempted to shoot my mouth off all the time, and I don't want to do that. But then this is a combination of things. It's a combination of um, we're getting the aftermath of him walking out on the on the restaurant after Riva basically tries to force him back into the little box that he's been in,
Yeah.
and you get there's so many elements at play. You get in just the once it's directed and shot so beautifully to cut back and forth between um, Oliver Platt playing the critic, uh, basically eating the same food and having the reaction he's having. Dustin Hoffman and Scarlett Johansson trying to placate him and save
Mhm.
as much face as they can. You see the how much the kitchen staff is a disaster, with Bobby Cannavale as a head now. Which, how have we not talked about him yet? But
Oh,
he's
yeah.
amazing.
He's
Um,
really good in this.
I love him in this movie, and then you also get the you get uh, Carl Casper back at his house cooking the meal that he was going to make, and it's all undercut to this amazingly chosen song, "Cavern" by Liquid Liquid, which
Mm.
it's got a thumping bass line that just kind of sells the tension and underscores the tension going on in all facets, right up until my favorite part of this scene, when he explodes back at the restaurant and screams his cooking philosophy back into Ramsey Michelle's face, culminating in a very unconvincing "you're not getting to me."
I think this is also a time where we were just beginning to learn what go viral really meant and
Yup.
how much it could destroy your career and
Mm-hmm.
continues to. I think there's been a lot of frustration and confusion over that the past few years. You know, a lot of people are like, it's so unfair when someone loses their job over something they said. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, in this time in history, we have this huge platform.
Oh yeah.
You can't really fault companies and business leaders for
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to get caught up in these tornadoes.
Sure.
So Carl, yeah, lampoons his career. I mean, this second scene is makes him unhireable, essentially.
It
Um,
does, but it's
yeah,
it's really just, though, you're watching a man destroy his career, but you're watching him bring somebody down with him at the same time, and at least
yeah,
try to. But it I think the beauty of the scene is it everything that has happened so far in this movie. Um, we haven't been he hasn't been able to get any sort of release for what's going on.
yes,
He
yeah, that's
gets a
true.
bad review. He's stifled by his boss. He can't see his kid. We haven't even gotten to the family stuff yet, but he can't really connect with his child. He can't connect with his ex-wife. He has so much stuff that he can't do. The one thing he can do is cook, and when he can't even do that, then it all boils over, and you're just it's cathartic, but it's also you're right. There's that double-edged sword. If it's cathartic to watch him just take someone to task, but it doesn't work, and that's where the beauty of the moment is. Because in any
Yeah.
other movie, it could be a triumph for him to do something like that, but we're showing that because of all the stress that has accumulated around him, it's not so much as a triumph, but just a snapping. And you're and it can't looking at it from a voice perspective. I always giggle every time his voice cracks on the last time he says "you're not getting to me." It's just like, oh man, we're in that phase. It's beautiful irony, and I love it so much.
And I think it's easy for him from his position to sort of dehumanize Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that we struggle a lot with. You know, you see it a lot on Twitter. Critics sort of get demonized, like it's their job to critique. But there is some truth in what Carl says about like these are real human beings you're talking about, and they
Mm-hmm.
work really hard.
Yeah.
And I think that part touched me because I think anyone who's worked in a restaurant knows, it is a very hard job
Hmm.
for the
Oh yeah.
cooks, for the servers, for the busboy, for everybody. It's a very
Hmm.
difficult, tenuous experience, and customers and critics tend to be harsh. And again, it sort of feels like an allegory to picking on a
Hmm.
movie project, right?
Sure.
Everyone working on that movie worked really hard, put their blood, sweat, and tears into a project, and then it gets ripped
Hmm.
apart by a critic, and it's like, well, that's easy to do, and so there is a part of us that's dealing with that. I don't
Oh
know,
yeah.
that wrestling with that. I definitely do in that scene.
I can see that. Yeah, and I think that it's just, whether it's a critic or just really now with social media, it's anybody, right? This guy's a
Right,
food
right, right.
blogger. This guy, the character of Ramsey Michelle is technically a food blogger, so he kind of has his
Mm,
own avenue for it. I think that also kind of the name of critic is a really nebulous thing right now, because I guess before a critic would be somebody that was hired by either a magazine or a newspaper to review
true.
things, and now with the internet and with social media, anybody can give their opinion on something. It's the everyone's a critic mentality.
Yeah.
Kind of, and in this movie, it's kind of played out for not really, it doesn't really show exactly what I was talking about, because he is a respected food blogger, but still a food blogger nonetheless. Um,
Right. He's not a
as it's going with
chef.
it.
I mean,
Yeah, he's not a chef.
that's
Yeah,
what
he's
Carl's point is like, you don't
mhm.
even really know what this is
Yeah,
like, and yet you're
absolutely.
commenting on it. And he's got a sort of sense of superiority and ego, I think, in that moment. So it is kind of like a self-critique in some ways.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
so
I
I
mean,
just think it's interesting. Like you said, it's not a triumphant moment. It's more of like a self-check.
it is definitely a self check, but it's a funny self check,
Hmm.
because it comes right at the point. We're talking about this movie very philosophically. I like to remind people who are listening, it's a comedy and very
That's true.
funny. Um,
Yeah.
and there are moments like this where it's very very funny. Um, and I think that what adds to it from the ego point that you're talking about is he just the right before that, he just cooked the entire meal that he was going to make for
Yeah, he
for
knows he
him.
can do it, and he
Yeah,
can wow him, which
he
is
knows what
painful,
he.
but he's being held back. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And so that's, I think, what. And then I think it's Twitter comments that bring him back into the restaurant to explode on people, and
Yeah.
it's just the relationship this movie has with social media is just so interesting to me, because you
Yeah,
have a
because it
novice.
becomes a win later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have a complete novice at it like Carl, who's everyone in his life is telling him, no, don't do this. Don't mess with him on Twitter. Don't just don't go for it. And he goes for it. And he doesn't know that it's just all in good fun. He's really taking it personally. And that's, I think, more of the ego driven part of him, uh, when it comes to it. And I think anybody who does something really well for an extended period of time is going to develop an ego about what they
Sure,
do. So,
sure.
um, and when that ego is combined with not thinking that the work that you're being allowed to do is up to your standard, that's going to cause some fragility to that ego. And so
Sure.
any shot taken at it, it's going to result in that uh, chocolate lava cake explosion.
Yum. Yeah, yeah, and this is kind of, his personal life is, he's sleeping with his hostess, he's not getting along with his son, he
Hmm.
is estranged to his ex-wife. Like his life is not going in a good
No,
direction. Yeah.
it is not. He's not an enviable person when we in the first, I say, half hour of the movie.
Right,
He,
right, right.
the only thing really enviable is that he can cook like a mother.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
that's the best. That's where we are. And the movie is about getting him back. It's I anytime I tell people about this movie, because, and I'm so glad that you reacted so favorably when I mentioned this movie as what I want to do, because I don't think people know about it as much as they should. It's
Uh-huh.
a movie about reclaiming your passion, and
Exactly. Yeah.
it's not just rediscovering, but also I use that word carefully, reclaiming, because it's his journey, not just to say, oh, this is something I like to do. We know that he's a good chef, he knows he's a good chef, but doing it at the level that he was doing it on, it wasn't fulfilling him. So finding a different level, finding a different way to go about it, making that reclamation of his passion is what drives him forward for the rest of the movie, and allows him to reconnect with his son, allows him to reconnect with his ex-wife, which, spoilers, they marry at the end, or remarry, I
Yeah,
should
I
say.
think
So,
that's the only part. I honestly, like, I remember I saw this with my mom, and she
mhm.
after we watched it, she said, "I didn't really like that aspect." She was like, "I didn't like Sofia Vergara's character sort of her life being somewhat on hold as well, and sort of placating his ego and getting him back, and then they get back together. She almost would have preferred that she stay with Robert Downey Jr.
Hmm.
And I kind of think that would be the more realistic ending, because I don't, even though I feel sorry and sympathetic for Carl, I think it's strange that that her life is sort of also put on hold, and she's kind of, I don't know. She's doing a lot of different parts, helping him get back, doing all this, and also kind of in a way waiting around for him.
Hmm.
And I've heard more than one woman have that reaction. Like I had another friend that like didn't like the movie at all because they couldn't get over that aspect. So I would say
Wow.
that this is sort of a bit of a fantasy.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't think this is exactly how it would play out.
It,
I don't think your really hot wife would wait back at home, give up her really hot Robert Downey Jr. boyfriend, forgive your indiscretion with Molly and welcome you back with open arms. I think that's a stretch. And maybe like that is coming from like a female perspective, but I would say that it's very minor. The relationship even that he has with his wife, I think, is not front and center to the relationship he has with his son and with
yeah.
food. So I don't think it's a big deal, but I have heard that criticism of it, and I agree a little bit.
That's the first time I've ever heard that criticism of this movie, so I'm gonna have to digest it. One, just I isn't it that though, that Inez Sofia Vergara's character, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, she's married to Robert Downey Jr. before she married Jon Favreau.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I
So
think
he's a
that's how it
real
goes.
ex.
So
Okay, okay.
they were
I thought
married.
he
They
was an
split.
in between ex. So I guess that makes a little more sense.
The
Yeah.
way that I think it's played out in the movie is that he was married. That Robert Downey Jr. and Sofia Vergara were married. Then they've split up. She married Jon Favreau, has a child with him. They divorced, and I think in the movie they say that there was one night where she and Robert Downey Jr. reconnected for like a second, but it didn't go.
Yeah.
It didn't go anything like that. Like they had one night together after she and Jon Favreau divorced, and then that was it. And
Convenient.
like
He
they
has a whole
still,
relationship. She has one night. But
it's
yeah.
basically where that goes. Yeah, I see.
But
I could see it, and I I can totally understand that perspective. Her character, um, I get the sense from when I was watching it though, I kind of got more the impression that she had her shit together,
this
for
is
lack of a
true.
better
She's
term.
she's actually the backing because she's the
Yeah,
rich one. She
she's
can rescue him, poor Carl, from his situation, and
of
Marvin.
course.
And the positive, I think, is
Hmm.
that Marvin is the ex, and he's still attracted to Sophia, obviously, but
Yep.
who isn't? But
Come
he
on.
I think he's very mature. Whereas Carl maybe is at this point in his life a little immature. Inez and Marvin are very gracious, and
Hmm.
they really help Carl, and I think that's a
Yeah.
really positive thing to portray an ex that way. So I do like that. But yeah, Inez is definitely. I mean,
I
she's got her stuff together, like you said, and she's
yeah.
trying to help out someone that she cares about. Maybe we should think of them as more of almost like they're on a break.
It seems
We
that way
were on
because
a
I
break,
think
yeah.
if I'm yeah, we'll go back to the Friends theory for this one. I the way I've approached it, and we don't know what happened in the past. We're kind of dropped in with Carl veering towards his lowest moment, so we
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know what why they broke up. We don't know anything there. What we can assume though is that Carl and Inez broke up because of all of the attention that Carl was paying on his career. And
Yeah,
even
yeah,
though
yeah, true.
she's definitely a career-minded person, but seems to have it more where she can be more well balanced about it. Whereas he just had that, and
Exactly.
that's a maturity thing too, where he isn't able to separate his career versus his personal life, because it's, I guess, as a chef or as anybody you're taught, if you want to go in any art, you got to go whole hog. We actors say that all the time.
Hmm.
Musicians say that all the time. Uh, Chefs, I think that's a big part of it as well. And so with Sophia's career, she can have her career, and still be a wife and a mother and do all those things. I think that that's kind of shows strength of character and maturity there. And it's only when Carl reclaims his passion that he's able to see, um, kind of what he missed by devoting so much to things that didn't matter. And it also kind of
Yes.
I think on the turning point for her it's that, oh, this is the person I fell in love with. I don't know if she was waiting
Yes,
around
absolutely.
so much as saying, yeah, okay, well, they have to be in each other's lives because of their kid.
Oh,
So
for sure.
it's
Yeah.
something that she probably was like, man, if he would only just get it together. And it wasn't like she was waiting around for him. She went and had some fun with her ex. So
Yeah, and she has her career, but yeah, I
and
think
all
you're right.
that. Mm-hmm.
I think and another big part of this is he's so focused on the approval of the critic,
Mm-hmm.
of his fans, of everybody else, and he's got a number one fan at home, and that's Percy, the person
Yeah.
that he's ignoring the most.
Oh yeah.
Um, and this whole movie is about about him reclaiming his passion, but also about him realizing that he has this huge support system. Inez, Percy, Martin, and Tony. Well, Tony not as much, but Martin.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Yep.
got a big support system at home. He doesn't need to look for the approval of Molly and Reva and Ramsey,
Sure.
and that's a big part of it. Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
under
I just
yeah,
wanted to touch
makes
on that
perfect
just because
sense.
I've heard that a couple times, and I've
I
had those thoughts myself. So I thought it'd be fun to explore it a little bit. But
I'm
it's
glad
not
you
a knock
did.
on the movie because I
Oh
like
no,
the
I'm
movie a
glad
lot.
you did. I love kind of hearing that. I come from one perspective. I have the straight white male perspective of this, and this is a straight white male watching a movie about a straight white male. So I totally get that.
True.
Um, I totally get that. I love hearing the different ideas. I just bring what I think into it, and man, if people want to say that, yeah, Sophia or Inez seemed a little ancillary, I can understand that too.
Yeah, I mean, all the characters are kinda ancillary to Carl, really,
It really
anyway,
is,
but because it's about him. Yeah.
and yeah, again, that's again, it's a character driven piece that is all
Yes,
about him.
very
If
much
we,
so.
I feel like that there's room. Like if we wanted to see the prequel of what happened to Inez and Carl at the beginning, that would be some fun meat to dive into. So, but there's this, that's I think another strength is there's the characters are so rich that you want to know more about the people that are kind of
100%.
along the story.
Yeah.
Everybody like Riva and Molly drop out halfway through the movie. So
Yeah, they do.
these folks like and I think that's another strength here, is that there's really no antagonist. There's no villain. I mean, there are antagonists. You can't have a protagonist without an antagonist, but there is no like major villain to overcome. The villain is complacency
Yeah, it's this
and
internal conflict, man
disenchantment
versus
and
man.
absolutely it is the internal conflict. Like Reva's definitely an antagonist, being the stifling
Mhm.
creator. Marvin, or is it Marvin? That's Robert Downey Jr.'s character's name. um,
Yes, yeah.
there's a Marvin and a Martin, and one of them is good, and one of them is Robert Downey Jr. So I always want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Martin is John Leguizamo.
yes, one of the best. We'll get to
Yes.
him. We will get
Yeah.
to him. But like Marvin is an antagonist because he represents kind of different other love for Carl's wife, but he's not really the villain. Even Ramsey Michelle is not a villain because by the end of the movie, we kind of learn that, oh, I did that to light a fire up your ass and it worked. And now I'm going to give you money to start a restaurant.
Yeah,
So,
not only that, he was his fan,
yeah, big
he
time.
and he admits that later, I saw that you were stuck. And I think
Hmm.
that's a powerful thing to
Hmm.
say and to do is like we when we're going through a tough time, we don't necessarily want someone to point it out to us. I mean, that
Sure.
then we turn the ire on that person, and that's what
Oh,
Carl
yeah.
did. But it's like
Hmm.
actually he's another unknown support system in the
Absolutely.
end.
You
Yeah,
don't know what
I really like that.
it's the idea that when you've got such big blinders on, you don't know who's around you. And
Yeah.
when you take them off, when you're forced to step back, take off the blinders and see things differently, you then see that the people that you might have thought were good for you aren't, and the people that you thought weren't good for you might actually be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like maybe it's painful to hear that criticism, but yeah, I
Sure.
think he was an echo chamber of everyone saying he's great.
Yep.
So he needed it.
Absolutely.
Well, what's another scene that we haven't touched on yet that you really connect with?
There are some really good ones throughout this whole movie. I think that I'll take two more kind of towards the middle to the end of the movie. It's the first one that I always think about is when um, Carl, Inez, and Percy go to Miami and hear Inez's father performing,
Mhm.
and just that whole sequence. Um,
Yeah.
I love that. the music. I have to shout out the music in this movie. It
Yeah.
is incredible the what they are able to do. They're able to kind of give you the sense of everything that's going on through the music that they choose. I've already highlighted Cavern, just that driving beat that really underscores the tension of the scene. The There's the music that's going on when he's making the pasta, which is it's called "Message to You, Rudy," which is just a nice, fun little reggae joint that kind of shows him a more of a playful side. And then the movie kind of takes shape as he goes different places. You get the Cuban music when he's in Miami. You get some more New Orleans style music. I think they do a like brass band remix of "Sexual Healing" in there when he's in New
Hmm.
Orleans. And you get some Texas blues. Gary Clark Jr., who I discovered from this movie, who's amazing. If you're not on Gary Clark Jr., he's a
Okay.
blues guitarist and singer, amazing. He's worked with Foo Fighters. He's done work all over the place, and he's great. But the music just kind of transforms, and I think as kind of it's a fun little moment too, watching Percy's grandfather playing in his band, because it's like, oh, you kind of forget that they're not married, that
Yeah.
Carl and Inez are not married. Like, oh, we're having fun, we're dancing, and you kind of forget that he has been kind of a terrible father, because they're just having a good moment. And I think it's a really cool thing that just kind of feeds into that kind of spirit. Is like, okay, can we get back to that? And I
Yeah.
think that
Have
that's
sort of
where
some
it
balance
feeds
and
in.
well-being in your life instead of
Hmm.
just work. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that scene gets me, and then the some of the scenes involving Carl teaching his son about the ways of being a chef,
Yeah. The
giving
knife
him
stuff makes
say
you want to go
what?
out and buy a knife.
I know,
Yeah. Yeah.
giving a chef's knife, and this is something that you learn about when you watch as much Food Network and consume as much chef culture as I have. Um, Chefs and their tools is like one and the same.
Yeah.
It's like a swordsman and his sword, basically, for that metaphor. Like
Yeah.
a swordsman, if you're like watching any shows about knights or like a Game of Thrones type of situation, they choose their swords very carefully. They choose their weapons that they use very carefully. And the same thing with the world of food. You get a relationship with the knives that you have. Every chef does not use knives that are provided to him or her. They use the knives that they own. So
Hmm.
the fact that he's giving he's giving Percy, I should say, his own chef's knife, that's kind of a welcome to the club, a
Yeah.
big rite of passage. And it's something that, like you said, Percy's his number one fan. So by doing this, it just kind of like it helps to kind of reinvigorate that bond as well between the two of them.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned we'll kind of talk about it a little bit. I kind of wanted to talk, I guess it's not a specific scene, but
Go for
I
it.
did kind of want to talk a little bit about John Leguizamo's character as Martin.
Oh, he's so good.
Number one, I love Leguizamo so much.
John
Um,
Leguizamo is one of those sneaky people that shows up in things, and you're like, oh,
yes.
he's great.
I'm
Like
like, you're like, I'm glad you're here. It's
I
like he adds something to every role that he does, even when it's
every
small.
time, whether he's a sloth or a future seeing hermit or a line cook at a restaurant. Another random fun fact as we're about to dive into him, uh, John Leguizamo also spent about a week working as a line cook to prep for his role in the movie.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
I
so
Yeah.
the prep is real for this. And also this just sounds like the most fun prep you could do for a movie. Just to be like, all right,
Yes,
I'm gonna go prep for my role as a chef by being a chef somewhere, by being a cook somewhere. Like as opposed to like somebody who's like in a movie about a boxer being like, I'm gonna go ahead and get my face punched in for 15 minutes a day. Nope, that's way more fun to me is to go in and
I
actually
agree.
cook for a week.
More fun than any boot camp that you might have to
Oh
do
yeah.
for a superhero movie. But
Hmm.
the thing that I like about Martin's character is I think he highlights how important line cooks are and how
Yes.
important the people behind the scenes. You've got the celebrity chef, right? And I think all
Hmm.
the attention is typically on them. They're the celebrity, they're the boss, they're the most important, but they're all these people behind the scenes in
Hmm.
restaurants that don't usually get the same attention. I think Anthony Bourdain made that a big part of his mission
Sure.
when he was talking about food. He's like, you know, there's all these celebrity chefs, but they're not making your food. This guy is, and they
Hmm.
kind of are the unsung heroes of the kitchen. and of society in a lot of ways, because they're the, lower paid, lower end of the food industry, and yet they drive it. And I love any project that sort of highlights and talks about that. And so I
Hmm.
think Martin's character as support, he gets impassioned by what Carl does, and he quits his job and he follows him around all over the country,
Yeah,
helping him. And I just think that's such a great character, and I just really
it
enjoyed his presence in the film.
it's absolutely where it needs to be with that. I completely agree. You talked about your restaurant experience. I don't have exact restaurant experience, but I did when I was younger serve as kind of a line cook of sorts for the kitchen of a Jewish day camp in New York. Uh, just a summer camp at a temple,
Oh, okay,
basically is what
cool,
it
very
was.
cool.
Is basically what it was. My buddy got me a job as a camp counselor, and I transitioned into the kitchens for a summer. And that was, you really get a good respect for people who make the food,
Yeah.
because we had our kitchen staff coordinator, and she would set the recipes, but then somebody's back there just shredding all the lettuce or cutting up all the
Yeah.
apples or washing all the rice or whatever it might be. Somebody is back there making sure that all of this is mowing through potatoes, mowing through produce, just to make sure that that's ready to go for what's needed. And I love that he represents that. I also, it's so interesting because I've been thinking about this one aspect of the movie. Martin is such a big support to him, and you're right that he is unsung, and I think that's exemplified the best in the fact that despite the fact that Carl works in LA and is married to Sofia Vergara, he doesn't speak a lick of Spanish. and
Right.
and he's has Martin there as his translator basically throughout the entire movie. He's Martin is the one who communicates things when he's at Galois, when he's at the restaurant, and then when he's in Miami, helping to get the food truck cleaned up with the staff that's there. He's the one speaking to them. So basically, he never really had to learn Spanish because he's always had people to do it for him, whether it's his
Hmm.
wife or his coworker, his sous chef Martin, in those ways. So it
Yeah.
just kind of highlights just how needed it actually is. And I
Yeah.
would have loved for there to be a moment where he starts to learn to pick up a little bit more Spanish, kind of
Yeah, good
as a
point.
show of growth, absolutely in his character. But the fact that he's got these people, and you kind of get the sense that before Martin shows up in Miami, things aren't going to work out. It just highlights just how much it's needed for that, because again, and it not only does he do it for getting over a language barrier, he also kind of gets over a personal barrier, because you have this right up until that happens, you have Percy basically just cleaning the whole thing and not really understanding why. And then
Yeah.
Martin's a kind of also the best example of, okay, this is what it means to work in a kitchen as well. He kind
Hmm.
of brings that. I mean, John Carl obviously knows what it is, but Carl's also dad, and it's very difficult
Yes.
sometimes to separate the parent for a child to separate their parent from what they do, because it's that's dad, that's mom. They're just this is what's going on, and we get that. And one of my favorite moments, which I'll get to in a moment, but just to really put some shine on John Leguizamo and Martin, having another person there to kind of walk him through the ropes of what it means to be kitchen staff really not only solidifies them as a restaurant team or as a food truck team, but it helps to kind of increase that bond between Percy and Carl to a new level of
Hmm.
admiration. I think was that what you were going to talk about when
Oh,
we cut each other
yeah,
off?
and the only thing I was gonna add to that is that I think it was a very good and intentional choice for John Leguizamo to cast, or for, I'm sorry, for Jon Favreau to have, Martin played by John Leguizamo, and to
Mm,
include the Spanish speaking element of it, because the backbone of the, restaurant history in America is typically Latinx people.
absolutely.
And it shows something there to say that Martin is so essential and necessary because of that language barrier, and how, like, how do you even be successful and thrive in this career without, that aspect of it. It is kind of like a funny thing that he doesn't even speak Spanish, and he has to rely on his sous chef. But I think it's important to highlight people like that in the industry, because it's so true. So I don't know, that was the only thing I was going to add, but
It
totally
really
100% agree with everything you said as well.
absolutely it's such a cool thing, and I love how much stock they're taking in kind of showing restaurant culture and showing all of
Hmm.
that. I think the biggest part of that, and the kind of the culminating moment for me of the whole movie, is what I call the burnt sandwich monologue. Uh,
Yeah.
it's the moment where where they're serving their the workers there at the like at I guess it's a body shop is where they are. They're serving the
Hmm.
workers um, food like as payment for helping them out, which that's going to be some of the best payment that I could go for when I'm putting in that just feed. I mean, when anyone ever asks me to move, I say yes. I take payment in food, and that's usually how it goes. But they do it, and they're about to feed serve a sandwich that's been burnt. And Percy's just like, why? Why would we not serve that? They're not gonna. And it's not like they're paying for it. And then basically the thesis of the movie comes up in this monologue, which is
Yeah.
basically Carl telling his son that he is good at being a chef, and it's basically the only thing he's been good at. He is
Hmm.
going to do this and serve people his best work, his best effort, because he can and he's good at it. He may not be the
Yeah.
best husband, he may not be the best father, he may not be the best at navigating the world as we see with him in social media, but he is good at one thing, and that is making some bomb ass food. And he is going
Yeah.
to show that as often as he possibly can. And the look of awe in that kid's face throughout this whole monologue, the fact, and it's underscored by the fact that he addresses his own father as yes chef,
Yes.
is amazing. And it just kind of shows that there's just this profound level of respect that this 10-year-old has for his father now, knowing, okay, he's admitting that he hasn't been the best, but he knows what he's good at, and he's trying to improve what he's not good at through what he is good at. And it just, that monologue just makes the whole thing for me.
Hmm. And I think, one really cool aspect about his relationship with his son is that, um, every city that he goes to, he's really good at the food part. He's
Mm-hmm.
bad at the connection part.
Oh, yeah.
And Percy, through social media, is able to bridge that gap for him by saying, "Hey, we're going to be here, and meet us here, and we'll eat here." And like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, John Favreau's character needed that support. He needed somebody to make connections with local people
Absolutely.
in each town until he gains a following, and that's kind of what leads to the relaunching of his career. So,
It's
yeah.
amazing. And the whole fact that his son does this for him, and like, I guess it shows like maybe it's a cliche, but young people are better at new internet,
Oh, absolutely.
which is totally
They
true.
just are.
They
Okay,
just
they're
are.
way better than I am.
They can take it, and it's great. And the fact that he's doing this and he's building this out is so cool, because it's again, like you just said, it's that weak point in Carl's game that is improved when he relies on other people and relies on what everybody else brings to the table.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love about it is it kind of, there's a moment, I can't remember what city they're in, but there's a moment where he's talking to a customer and he's saying like, "How did you find us?" It's like, showed him the social media thing. He's like, "Yeah, my kid did that," and it's like the most like proud son thing or proud father moment that you could have in a
Yeah,
movie
and it's
about an extremely good chef just being like, "Hey, yeah, my kid did that. That's so cool."
yeah, and it's good for him because, he's viewed social media as an enemy up until this point, and
Yeah.
yet now it's his greatest adversary. It's just how you use it,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Absolutely.
Not
That'll
to
kind
start
of
arguments.
oh yeah, that all kind of keys into the 1 second every day montage at the very end too.
Yes.
I've had friends. I've always thought it was kind of silly, to be honest. And
Yeah,
this,
it's not something I've ever been able to successfully use.
I've never done it. I've never had I experience with that. But I will say, like, I have a friend who did it during the month in which my wife and I got married, and he was at our wedding. And to see that moment show up in everything he did that month was like pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, that part was pretty neat. And then seeing it all kind of show, and that kind of being the thing that really solidifies where Carl's going to be heading in the future. Of saying, yes, this is going to be a family affair. This restaurant, because he was pretty dead set on like, yes, this was a fun little jaunty road trip that we took through some of the best food cities in America. but you got to go to school. You still got to be a person, and I got to have my thing over here, and your thing's going to go
Mhm.
back over where it is. And now, with once he saw what his son had done with the with that video, and just capturing all those great moments, not just getting the heat of it, but just them just sitting out, driving places, rubbing cornstarch on your crotch, all of those great moments. He's just like, oh yeah, no, this is a family thing, and we're gonna make it work. And that's I think the key for him too, is involving his family and making it more of a
Yes.
family business as opposed to this is the Carl Casper show.
Well, I was thinking even when I was watching an episode of the documentary where they had the lady from the milk bar,
Mm-hmm.
and she was so engaging and so infectious and so fun to watch. She kept
Yeah.
talking about how she liked imbuing parts of her childhood and what kids like to eat into her food, and she had this sort of childlike quality. Even her outfit had like a rainbow on the collar and fun stuff in her kitchen. And I something that's always stuck with me that I've heard a long time ago, and I think continues to be true, is that if people are going to buy what you're selling, they want to know more about you.
Oh yeah.
They want to get to know you, and you are the most important part of your brand, whatever
Sure.
that means.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the piece that Carl was missing. People didn't want a technically well-made meal or him on his own. His family brings a lot of flavor
Mm-hmm.
to what he's selling, and people want to get to know him, and they want him to be relatable. And yeah, that's just something that's always stuck with me. People are going to be more invested if you're invested
Mm-hmm.
in connecting with them. So yeah,
Absolutely.
his family does have to be a part of that.
Absolutely, and it's both his given family with Inez and Percy, and his chosen family with Martin
Yeah,
too, and it's all everything's kind of in there because I think about the scene where the fully painted food truck is revealed for the first time. It's
yeah.
like this. It's like, and I think Carl would have been content to sell out of a dilapidated ice cream truck and what it looked like before. But then
Hmm.
when he gets the El Jefe makeover, it's
Yes.
that just becomes part of the brand, and it becomes part of the thing because again that's something Martin calls him, that he's adopted as his as kind of
Yeah, it's
his
like the
brand.
chief. Yeah.
It's all there in it, and I really just love that that comes together in that sense. And I also think that what you're talking about with branding and getting to know it, and also kind of the idea that you are also using your brand to serve other people in
Right,
wherever
it
you
has to be
are.
authentic.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's and you kind of get that the authenticity, even though like you someone might see taking a Cuban food truck and adding beignets or adding like brisket when you're in Texas, or bit like beignets when you're in New
New
Orleans,
Orleans. Yeah.
as kind of like pandering to the city you're in, but it also shows that they respect the flavor in there, and I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what the people are going. That's what kind of helps them out. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to take all these great ideas, add them to what we do, and it's going to be that much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Food fusion.
I love it.
Yeah, me too. Well, are there any other scenes that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted
um,
to chat about?
I don't know. I think the some of the more bonding moments that don't really like further the story, but are just there to show the character growth, are worth
Mhm.
mentioning. Like I always think about the cornstarch scene,
Yeah.
which which is
Yeah, I was gonna say earlier, the biggest thing I walked away with, not just in a food truck, but in a kitchen, is it's hot
oh
back
god,
there. I don't
yes.
think I could ever do that job because of how hot it is.
It is a
It's
sweaty
miserable.
job. It is a
Mhm.
very sweaty job. And if you think about it, especially in some of the settings, they're mostly in southern towns or places with more tropical climates. They're in Miami, they're in LA,
Yeah.
They're in Austin, they're in New Orleans,
Yeah.
they're in all these hot places. The kitchens are hot. You can have those industrial fans. The food truck, I think they had
It's
maybe
gotta be
one
like a tin
fan.
can.
They
Yeah.
had maybe one
Just
tiny
cooking
like
them.
dashboard
Yeah.
fan, but my god, but that like that part of it all made me so happy, and I love that they put the spotlight on certain things. Like
Yeah.
I remember the first time I had my first beignet in New Orleans at Cafe du
Me
Monde.
too.
I can remember that feeling of being like this is. I was with some of my college buddies. We were there for March Madness, and I was just like, this is one of the best pieces of food I've ever eaten in here. And all the food there is fantastic, and they're showing that and showing that through these bonding moments. my favorite one is when they go to Franklin's in Austin. I don't know if you've ever been able to go there and sit on that line, but that's
Ironically, I've had a beignet. I've gone to Café du Monde.
there you go.
I think the first time I went, I couldn't even get in, and I had to go to a place down the street
Ah,
to get a beignet. And
yep.
weirdly, I spotted actually Tig Notaro there. It was a long time
Oh,
ago,
that's
but I
fun.
saw her in line, and I went, "I think that's Tig." And I looked at her Twitter and saw that she actually was in New Orleans. I'm like, "Oh, it's here." I didn't say anything to her. I just saw her, and
That's
I thought, "How weird!"
fantastic.
Because I couldn't go to Café du Monde, I saw her over here.
Well, there you go.
Anyway, but ironically, I've never been to Franklin's. I until probably the past couple years was not a big barbecue person.
Mm,
I'm not really that into red meat, if I'm honest. That's more
sure.
my husband's deal, but he's sort of given me a better appreciation of that.
Okay.
So I've never stood in any sort of barbecue line. I'm not
I've
above it, but because it is so difficult to get in the door still at Franklin's, I just haven't been able to.
and I've
So
I've never been in Austin long enough or for enough of a leisure reason to be like, yeah, okay, this is what
give
I
up a
have.
whole
I have a
morning.
couple hours. I can go stand on this line. That's
It's like tailgating. You have to bring, like, a lawn chair,
oh yeah,
and, like, I mean, and get
yep.
there at 8 a.m. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
that's just not my style, and sitting down to eat a huge plate of barbecue at 9 or 10 AM is just I just can't do it, so I haven't done it yet.
Sure, sure, but just the for since you and I both haven't done it, we can live vicariously through this movie,
Yes.
showing us just how good that brisket looked, and the fact that they
Yeah,
used
it looks phenomenal.
that wasn't actors; those were the real chefs and GMs of Franklin's. They got to highlight that, and I think that that's
Mhm.
a really cool thing that they were able to kind of showcase. Okay, these are the people that actually do this, and kind of incorporate them into the movie. Where we know that Favreau and Leguizamo and Cannavale are playing chefs, but here's the real folk, and
Yeah,
we're going to highlight them too, and I think that that's really neat.
sort of a Blues Brothers-ish.
Oh, absolutely, another one of my
Right. Here are
favorites.
the real ones, you
Mm,
know? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. It is. It's exactly. It's the scene at Franklin's is just like the scene in Blues Brothers where they're watching the street musicians, and Dan Aykroyd just goes "yup" and then walks into a music shop. That's
Yeah.
exactly what that is. Thank you for making that connection between two of my favorite movies. I appreciate you.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites, and I always thought what was so successful about it was that, yeah, it's about the Blues Brothers, but they have, Aretha Franklin and so many other greats in the movie. They're
Sure,
they're being very intentional about being like, "Okay, these are the real thing."
absolutely.
And so I think this movie does a good job of that too.
And yeah, just the fact that they're taking so much care into the food aspects of it. I love, and this is not even directly related to the movie, but I absolutely love the kind of the mid credits. It's not really a mid credit, but alongside the credits, they're showing takes of Roy Choi teaching Jon Favreau how to cook, and just
Right.
what he's doing is like, okay, by including that in the movie, you're showing, okay, this is made with the most amount of love and respect for the restaurant industry and food culture as a whole, and what these people do to make the food that we eat. Because again, it can be so taken for granted, but because it's something we have to do, and we can either buy it from a store, go to a restaurant, make it ourselves, and it's just something that has to happen in our lives. But really, and so we take it for granted, but just to show that love and care at the very end there really ties the whole movie together for me.
Right, 100%. Well, I guess that brings me to my last couple of questions for you
Let's
then.
go for it.
So number 1, if you had to summarize, what is it about this film that keeps you coming back to it? Why is it a comfort movie?
That's a good question. Because yeah, this is one of those movies where I'll just like, if I don't have anything to watch or listen to, and it's on Netflix, I'm gonna shake my fist angrily at the sky for that. But if it's available and I can just be like, yeah, okay, I'll go back to it, and it just feels good. It's one of those movies like if you ever feel like you're in a spot where what you do isn't being appreciated the way you want it to be, if you feel like you're stuck in a zone, it's kind of that kick. It can be definitely that kick in the pants that you need to be like, okay, this guy did it, maybe I could do that too. And that's helped me. I've gone through some career uh, peaks and valleys since the movie came out, and it's definitely something that comes back to what's
Yeah.
going on, and kind of helps out in that way. But it's also just from that level. There's I think why Food Network is so successful and why Instagram is just basically 80% people taking pictures of what they get at restaurants is that looking at good food is awesome.
Yes.
looking at, and it's one of those, and it's just one of those things where if you see somebody and looking at people who care about what they do is just as awesome. And so I think those are the things that continue to bring me back. Just watching this guy's journey to reclaiming his passion while also watching some really good food being made comes together. I would definitely not recommend that people watch this movie if they haven't eaten,
Yeah.
because you will then immediately go and raid your fridge for everything.
Mhm. I'm kind of thankful for foodie culture lately, in the
Sure.
past decade or so, because I think we were kind of stuck as a society, especially here in America, of this sort of kind of really honestly, just gonna say it, toxic diet culture
Yep.
where we really demonize food.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie highlights the fact that food is a pleasure and that that's okay,
Yeah.
and that it's such a big part of our family and our experience and our
Mm-hmm.
connections with other human beings. And so anything that kind of furthers that agenda, I am 100% more on board for. And I think this
Absolutely.
movie is just such a empowering and uplifting story, but also very, touching.
Yeah.
And in a world where we kind of sometimes overpraise things that are maybe dour and dramatic and too sad,
Mm.
I like a good independent film that's upbeat.
It's a
So
good it's a really good,
yeah,
you come out of the movie with a smile on your face. And I just going back to what you're talking about with the what the kind of opinions about food, I find that really ironic because so many of our first memories or first like real bonding points
yeah,
with family, with romantic partners, whatever it might be, is about food. Where you
yes,
usually go on a first date, to a restaurant, to a bar, to something involving consuming food or drink. Um, I cannot. There are certain. I can't remember every gift I got for Christmas, but I can remember sitting in the kitchen making meatballs with my mom as
one
at any
hundred percent.
opportunity. I can remember those things. I remember seeing my little Italian great grandmother slaving over the sauce for like 3 hours at a time, just going through it. I remember baking with my grandma. I can remember all of these things, and I think that that's what kind of keys it together. Like falling in love with my wife, we did it over cooking together. So I
Mm.
love stuff like that, and I think that it's so ironic that food gets such a bad rap because of what it can do to one's health if used improperly. But I think that the food culture, we're trying to be like, no, food is not the enemy. The way that we use it has been the enemy. So let's go back to using it the right way.
Exactly. I was
Mm-hmm.
reading something this past week that really struck with me, that a lot of people, will say that, oh, I'm addicted to food, or I use food as a coping mechanism, as comfort. And they're like, well, duh, because every single most important thing that's ever happened to us has been centered on food.
Yep.
Weddings, and celebrations, a promotion at work.
Mm-hmm.
Food is a big part of that. So we
Yep.
really shouldn't demonize it. I mean,
Yep.
it is an important part of our lives. It is something that helps us connect to others. So yeah, I agree with
Absolutely.
everything you just said. If you had to pitch this to somebody like that's never seen Chef before, that's maybe sees the cover, is thinking about it, what do you say to them?
Uh, my phrase, and I said it before, I'll repeat it here, is this is a movie about reclaiming your passion. It is
Yeah,
a It is that is at its core. If they need a little more than
yeah,
that, I will say this is Jon Favreau playing a chef who gets so complacent at his job and goes on an internet tirade um, about it, then finds his way back to loving what he does through a food truck. And
hmm,
and I would say if you like movies with good food and really good performances, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love this
yeah,
movie. It's
truly
such
a
an
hidden gem.
it's
Hmm.
such an effortless thing too. I think I don't know if this was done specifically for this movie or this is just Jon Favreau's directing style, but it really feels so like you're in the moment. If I love movies where I can't tell if it's scripted or if it's improv, and this is
Hmm.
kind of one of those movies where you kind of get that there's an outline and maybe he didn't exactly script out every single moment and just lets his actors roll, and that I think brings you into the world even more. You can't tell me that every word of the Robert Downey Jr. scene was right there on the script. I refuse to
Oh
believe
yeah,
that.
I agree
Refuse to
with you.
believe that. And it's just and telling folks and pitching it to them. I tend to overpitch, but that's one of the things that I would use. Like this is just an effortless, uplifting movie about some good food that's going to give you a good story about reclaiming your passion.
Well, I could not have said it better, so I 100% agree. Well, Chris, thank you so much, for picking this movie. Thank you for coming on. I've appreciated having you. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
Uh, I guess like I said at the top, I'm not the most social media literate person. The only thing I really do keep is a TikTok, and you can find me at Chris Daria 7 on
Okay.
TikTok. I haven't posted there in a while. Mostly my stuff on there is I'm a musician, a sax player, and
Oh, awesome.
I'll like throw up some stuff. I put out a medley of Disney songs that I made through during the pandemic on that is all sax, and so I'm trying to
Very
figure out
cool.
where that's going to go next. But as I do, enjoy what's up there right now. Chris Daria 7, no apostrophe in there, but yes, Chris Daria 7 is my TikTok handle, and that's really all I have to drive people toward. So
No
yeah.
worries.
Hmm.
Well, thank you again for picking this. You have to think about your next movie and hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely. We'll see how that food movie series goes between the two of us, Lisa.
Yes.
Sounds like a party.